So, welcome to Locking In on Security with Havoc Shield. Today's installment is Does Cyber History Repeat Itself? Our topic today is the evolution of corporate cybersecurity, and we'll be spending some time talking about the evolution of the threat landscape over the past few decades leading up to present. Some threats that existed 20 years ago are now totally gone. Some new threats have emerged, and surprisingly, many threat vectors that worked 20 years ago still work today. We're very pleased to be joined today by John Nordin, who has several decades in the security hot seat as Chief Information Officer at leading brands that we all know and love, and now spends time advising industry leaders on the new threat landscape. So welcome, John.
Thanks, Phil. Appreciate you having me.
John, I'd love to just start by talking about what drew you into the cybersecurity field in the first place. When you started taking on CIO roles in the early 1990s, what did you find appealing? It kind of feels like willingly stepping into the hot seat at a time when your colleagues might not quite have understood the importance of information security. So what was that journey like?
Yeah, it was interesting because I didn't step into the field because I was interested in security. I was interested in business and applying IT and security, particularly when I came as CIO, came along for the ride, as opposed to my earlier careers where I was in application development, and it was something that I didn't have to think about so much, or somebody else did that. When I woke up as a CIO in the mid-90s, I realized, oh boy, I've got this whole thing. I better start paying attention to it. So as I started to get aware of it, this was the mid-90s now. So I view myself as a second-generation CIO, but a first-generation internet CIO.
Sure.
As things started to happen, things are starting to really get connected, both internally and externally. But even then, in the mid-90s, most of my conversations were about internal security. Something as simple as making sure that passwords and accounts had only the appropriate access that they needed. So somebody who shouldn't be allowed to delete a transaction couldn't delete a transaction.
Sure, least privilege.
Access control lists, not sharing your sign-on, that sort of stuff.
Right.
Real basic stuff. And during those conversations, it became apparent to me that the business in general did not look at information. It wasn't cybersecurity at that point. It was information security or data security.
Right. The terminology has kind of changed over the years, right?
Yeah, because the world's gotten much more complex and a lot bigger. But when I talked at the board level or talked to my senior management peers, it was kind of, I got a lot of glazed expressions. Now, if I talked about D&O insurance, or I talked about fire protection in the plant, or I talked about personal property insurance,
right?
But that was fine.
No problem there, right? That's all understood.
That's all understood. Now, all of those things are, in case it happens, I will get some compensation for it. Security is, don't let it happen. And it's it's kind of behind the scenes, and it's hard to say it's harder to have was harder to have a conversation to say, give me $250,000 in next year's budget to do a red team ethical hack to bolster my edge security, because it's just so out of sight, out of mind. Some of that is IT's fault because we would fall into tech speak.
They just hoped it would stay out of sight, out of mind, and that was the hope, right?
And it's something that happens to somebody else.
Sure.
So that was the first thing. I think the second thing that occurred to me was that just because of how we did it, or how we started, or where we came from, which I guess would be the highly centralized, mainframe-centric world where I cut my teeth, is security was viewed as something that was done to me, as opposed to something we choose to do for ourselves.
Got it.
So it was punitive. Somebody showed up in your cube, with the corporate badge on, saying, you're doing something bad.
It almost feels like getting scolded. It almost feels like
Yeah,
someone's come by to scold you for not following the
exactly.
rules.
And in some cases, you didn't even know you were doing something bad. You know, so so trying to get those conversations going was it was all new. It was new to everybody, and so uh, it just became something I had, just another thing the CIO has to pay attention to. And this is long before you really had the modern day security personnel, infrastructure, certifications.
Sure.
This was, you gave it to the network guy, or you gave it to the system engineer, or you gave it to the database manager.
You didn't have kind of the community built up around it with all the supporting trainings and seminars and conferences and
Exactly.
certifications.
And you didn't share. You didn't go out and talk about this too much.
Right.
So that's the origins of this, and it just, as it snowballed, it just kept getting more and more complex, and more places, more and more potential holes, and you just needed to pay attention to it. And I was curious about it. I mean, the whole the idea of especially when it became apparent that people from the outside, bad actors, could come into your environment. Um, that's where it got more interesting. I guess more interesting.
Sure. Interesting, yes. Also, just you're even more in the hot seat at that point, right?
That's correct. And you're asking for more money, and you're if I hire a security guru or team or buy a security product, I'm probably not. I'm either asking for more money, or I'm taking something away from something that business really understands. The
Right.
latest release of the XYZ
Right.
system, even like a CPU upgrade,
Right.
extending the network because we just bought a business in North Carolina.
Sure.
They get that stuff. But this stuff is deep in the bowels of IT. It's behind the scenes. It's never happened to us.
Right.
So nobody has any battle scars at that point. There wasn't a lot of battle scars.
And it's difficult because when you're competing for budget and someone else has a request that the business does understand, and it's fund this one or that one, or how many dollars go to this initiative or that one, you sort of almost have this natural combatant in the budget process, and that's not really how it's supposed to be. We're trying to strengthen the business through stronger cybersecurity, not trying to take away anything else.
Right. But,
So yeah.
again, but the early conversations, and they still are. I'm sure this is still happening. We need a new roof on the plant, and it may be or we need to invest in cybersecurity.
Right.
That's really not an or.
Right. That's an and.
Right. It's an and.
Sure.
And the job of C-level executives is to figure out how to do those type of things in a way that satisfies both business needs.
Sure. Well, so let's fast forward a little bit to present and talk about, of some of the sort of cybersecurity concerns that you had back in that era. Let's talk about ones that are really no longer a threat or are substantially mitigated. So examples of where cybersecurity measures or training or education have led us to greater safety. Really, in other words, what are some examples of vulnerabilities where the good guys have either pretty much won or have fully won since those days?
Yeah, I think just replaying your question, we've gotten good at it, real good at a lot of things, but I don't think there's ever a case where the good guys have won completely. It's because it's an ongoing effort, and it's an ongoing, even for something as simple as setting up a new employee internally, and those threats are still there. We're able to get to them efficiently. We're able to head them off, put controls in place. Sometimes we have to put controls in place because of things like Sarbanes-Oxley or FDA requirement, which is onerous, but can be a good thing.
Sure.
Sometimes it's the customer who says you need to do certain things.
Right.
But when I started, the biggest threats were still a disgruntled or soon-to-be ex-employee walking out of the building with a green bar customer master report in the briefcase.
Oh, the green bars. Okay, so the old school reporting format, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, the
great.
big
Yeah.
chunk of dot matrix printer, and I printed out the customer master or the product master or the pricing master, and I walked out of the building.
If there's anyone
So,
watching that missed that era, so these are big 11 by 17 sheets with green bar, white bar, green bar, white bar, and dot matrix printing across every row of them, and
yeah,
would have been
exactly.
a very standard format for printing any type of report in that era.
Sure. And there was no controls over that stuff, especially when printers came out of the data center and were, departmental printers. That moved into the PC era, and as soon as the PC got connected to an existing infrastructure via a LAN, um, things started to get dicey because now I could start doing things even rudimentarily, cutting and pasting things, scraping my screen,
Sure.
taking things off on a mainframe application, and now I can put it on diskette, which is a threat that I could safely say has been completely eliminated.
Sure.
But it's been replaced by the thumb drive.
Right.
So there really is, those are good examples of threats. So what do? Do you lock the USB ports down
Right.
on your desktops? Do you put some sort of watching application out there to see when
Right.
this happens?
I've been in
Then
I've been in
email,
some facilities.
then email came up.
Yep.
So now I got the perfect storm. Now I don't even have to take a physical anything out of the office. I
Right.
can just mail things to myself or email things to other people.
Sure.
Or I can, and then the final I think the final thing thinking back on this was the spreadsheet. So now maybe that data never even originated on a corporate system. It originated on a departmental pro forma spreadsheet that somebody was using because they could,
Sure.
and they couldn't get through the queue in IT to get something done, so they just scraped or key entered and created a spreadsheet. So that stuff is all still out there. It's how do you head it off? How do you educate? Educate is a big one, right? And how do you put an infrastructure together that doesn't prevent all the good stuff that those tools and connectivity have created, and still protect you, or at least detect anomalies
Right.
on things.
And we're in this era where people feel comfortable kind of self-serving with that if the organization doesn't supply the website that they need access to or the tooling or the application they need access to, a lot of people just kind of feel free to go out and get it and put it on their laptop or go to that website and create an account and begin working. And kind of that sort of trend towards shadow IT is something that I think continues to expand. That maybe it's displaced others. It's displaced the walking out of the office with the green bar report, sure, but now there's maybe even faster and easier ways to walk out of the office virtually with the same level of classified information.
Absolutely, and now with the corporate network extending to the home or extending to anywhere via the internet, it's even easier to do things with data that you normally might not be able to access. So that's a big part of this now is it. And I have this will show my age, but I had this phrase I used throughout my CIO career when I ran into security issues like this, or abuse issues. Personal computers in the business are not personal computers.
Right.
They are business workstations. The business owns all that. And sometimes we allow you to do things on that infrastructure that may not directly relate to business because it's convenient, and it's almost like an employee perk that you should be able to sign on and do a little banking
Right.
on your lunch hour,
Right.
But it's not a personal computer.
That's right.
And I think we're at that stage now with work from home where we're going to have that same conversation, but it is a personal computer.
Right. The line gets blurrier every month. Are you really going to forbid an employee from popping in to check their Facebook feed a time or two a day? Are you really going to prevent someone from hopping on to check the headlines on Wall Street Journal, even though it's technically has nothing to do with their job responsibilities. So the line continues to blur, and that's in fact probably a good segue into our next sort of step in this conversation, which is let's talk about what are some of the threats that that existed 20 years ago that continue to exist despite all of our efforts to mitigate them. So the green bar report we talked about, even though you can still get information out of the building through other means, that threat has evolved. But I still believe there are threats from 20 years ago that we look back and say, yep, that was a problem back then, and guess what? Still a problem right now. So, what are some kind of examples that come to mind for you, and for anything we talk about here? Why in the world don't you think we've been able to fully close it up or mitigate it?
I'll answer the last part of that question first.
Sure.
People.
Humans.
We miss things despite our best efforts. We are given things that we shouldn't have been given, and we don't even know we have them. Poor practices within the business or IT. An example that just to this day I know is still out there. Default factory passwords on routers and switches.
Sure, absolutely.
They get installed. Everybody's in a hurry, and they never get changed.
In that moment when you're unboxing that router, I mean, I'm just remembering the last time that I've done that. You're usually in this moment of a real rush because you don't have internet at that site or you're home yet, and you really have this long list of things piling up that you need to do. So when you unbox that router and plug it in, it's like this temptation to just plug it in, do the bare minimum, and go on with your day, right?
Exactly. And I've had cases where the default passwords were changed to the same password, and we didn't change them when the network engineer left.
Sure.
Because it's onerous.
Right.
And you've got a rack full of these things, maybe in a third-party data center somewhere, and it's just another to-do. And so unless you add it to the exit process, exiting an employee and,
sure.
and de-accessing things, it never gets done. And then some people may not even know what that password is.
Sure.
So that's one.
I spent some time a few years ago helping someone in an office that had a corporate printer on their network where they just could not figure out what the password was, and they didn't know. Employees had left over the years, and it was probably set by someone 10 years ago, and they don't know what it is anymore. Well, I looked at the original user manual and found the default password in that manual, typed it in, and bingo, that's it. So it just keeps happening, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's something that those type of things need to be wired into the kind of the consciousness of things that we can do, because we do it all the time in other aspects of the business. We do it all the time in other aspects of IT. We always test the backup generator.
Right.
We don't wait for a power outage to test the backup generator. So it just needs to be part of the mindset. This is an overused word, but culture of how do I think about protecting the business? And that statement is not an IT statement. That's an everybody statement. Another one is same area, open ports on routers and switches. It's like, we've got a standard router configuration. We grab it, we install it, and somehow we still end up with an open port.
I can't believe it's still happening. But 20 years ago, a problem. 10 years ago, a problem. Now, a problem still.
Yeah, and it's not. Nobody says I'm going to leave the default password alone. I'm
right.
going to leave an open port.
Right.
There's a lot going on. It's complicated. If you're in a fast-moving business where you're growing or you're merging or acquiring, you're under the gun to get things done. Embedded passwords and code. That just happened last week to the Parler social media application. Somebody was able to, one, they were able to access their code, and two, they were able to see an SQL database password embedded in the code.
Right.
And they grabbed a bunch of data of users of Parler. Well, who put the embedded password? That's a programming practice.
Right.
That's a quality assurance practice. That's a don't ever do this practice.
Sure.
So, and then there's things still like open up the drawer and there's a Post-it note with a password on it.
And that hasn't changed either. That's still...
People will see that, because they got too many, or they don't have a password manager, and so they write themselves little Post-it notes. I used to find those all the time. I used to have, and as a CIO, I would hire third-party red teams to come in,
right,
and purposely go after everything from the data center to the edge, centralized business units to corporate. And I'd get in the report, Post-it note, underneath the laptop or in the drawer.
Oh,
so
absolutely. Absolutely.
So this is all additive. It hasn't gotten to the point in my mind where you can set it and forget it unless you go back to the dumb terminal, mainframe days, and nobody's going to do that.
I think we could probably go into any office in any major city right now and walk around and find a Post-it note. I'm confident of it.
Oh yeah, and you could walk around with their do's and don'ts in your hand, and just check off things.
Sure.
Because it drifts. That's another thing that happens. It's like a guitar that drifts out of tune, and you got to bring it back.
Right.
So it really is, in my mind, here's more to think about, and how do I not let the things we talked about are quote unquote easy things rear their ugly head as I'm dealing with the more sophisticated things.
Sure. Well, I'd say anyone entering a cybersecurity career at this time, they've got plenty to learn from the past, but also no shortage of these decades-long battles with threat vectors that we would really like to put behind us. We'd really like to put the Post-it note situation behind us. To
a highly qualified burgeoning cybersecurity person,
sure,
I want to go after the hackers, right?
Right.
I want the cyber intrusion stuff. Meanwhile, somebody down in accounts payable is doing something maybe unintentionally,
right?
Because their access control list is set up wrong.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So it's all of the above right now.
Yep. Well, and that leads me to really my final big wrap-up question here, which is, what threats do you see emerging right now, especially in this era where so many companies are really getting accustomed to this idea of either partially or fully working from home?
Yeah, I have quite a laundry list here.
I bet.
The very first thing would be just the home edge hardware. The router I have that's allowing us to do this. Did I change the factory default password when it was installed? Yeah, I did. But what else is going on? Is my network secure?
Sure.
Any and all things in Internet of Things I think is a tsunami.
I looked in my home recently. I've got, I think, 17 devices connected to my Wi-Fi. The doorbell, the smart speakers, the laptops, the kids' tablets, and some devices that I couldn't even immediately remember what in the world they were. So the IoT frontier is getting big.
And I think that, at least at the outset, is going to loose IoT in your house is going to be the access method. It's not going to be, I'm going to hack your doorbell.
Sure, right.
And make it ring differently, or I'm going to turn your refrigerator on. No, this refrigerator's got a screen on it,
right?
And it's driven by Android, and it's connected to the network. Let's see if I can get to the laptop and then put something on the laptop or the home PC, or can I monitor their access to the corporate network through the refrigerator?
Oh, I think it's incredibly likely, John. If we picked up 100 IoT devices, I'll bet you we can find one that gets its over-the-network updates over HTTP, not HTTPS, and in a manner where we could potentially put on whatever update we felt like doing, and it could be pretty devious.
Sure.
The threat landscape on that front is getting worse.
Yeah, I think back on the home front, this just occurred to me the other day. We turned off our Wi-Fi network because Comcast was surprising or somebody had a problem. but I was still using applications on my Android phone through the cell network.
Okay.
So I'm using Chrome to get to an external computer somewhere. Now, I don't know enough about the cell network to know the ins and outs of security there, but the mere fact that I could do it,
Sure.
if I had some malware on that phone that was watching keystroke, let's say use keystroke logger, right?
Sure.
The fact that I wasn't on the Wi-Fi may or may not matter. I don't know. But
Right.
the fact that I couldn't even answer the question for myself,
Right.
as to what's the data stream now that I'm on the cell network, I think that's a risk.
And that's an
These things-
uncomfortable part of cybersecurity these days is, even if you set out to mitigate the threats on your threat landscape, some of the threat vectors are ones where you don't even have a great way of discovering what the data flow is, and therefore it's tough to model out how you might be able to mitigate the risk.
Yeah, and it's tough enough. It's tough enough to do that job in IT, but to have to now educate people at home and have to wonder about the connected refrigerator.
Right.
And okay, how do I monitor that? There needs to be some automation, a lot of automation. It needs to be proactive automation, and just, as this is going to fan out, I think, in the home environment, or let's call it the remote environment, and things are going to be connected that you may not even know are connected. You get a brand new house and it's advertised as being, the connected house.
Right.
You come in there with your laptop, and all of a sudden, the furnace is talking to you, and you don't even know it.
I mean, I laugh, but how many sort of new homes these days have some technology wired in, smart lights or something like that, and this is going to be the norm, and we need to get used to it.
Yeah, and I think along that line, my last point would be the infrastructure outside the home. So, I mean, how many times do we have to read about a misconfigured AWS S3 bucket
Absolutely.
that's been left wide open? So that's not a work from home issue so much as it is, well, anybody with a credit card working from home
Sure.
could probably get themselves an AWS instance.
Absolutely.
And now I've got an S3 bucket out there that's wide open, or others. I want to pick on Amazon. That's just the one that seems to show up all the time. And so there's that also. That now I'm at home and I can go out, and I call it cloud sprawl. Is that now I can go out with my corporate credit card or my personal credit card. I'm working from home, and that's got to have happened now with IT folks.
Absolutely.
They're at home. They need a new instance. They're not going to go through, if they do have a process, to go through system engineering or somebody to ask for a new instance. They're going to go do it. And there's a potential hole.
Right. It's too tempting. You're holding the corporate card. You have an urgent need for a new cloud resource, and you could go through exactly the right channels, but there's a problem you're trying to solve for someone right now, and the fastest path is to go get the resource.
I'll get to it later. I'll write it down on the list, and I'll come back around and get it. So It's not malicious. It's just that cloud computing has created these opportunities to accidentally create holes in your infrastructure. So if you draw it on a wall behind me, from the refrigerator through the laptop, through the home router, out to Amazon, back to the corporate network, I mean, there's a lot of touch points.
Absolutely. And in many ways, these threat vectors have become dramatically more important since COVID hit, because there are now so many people working from home, transacting confidential information, financial transactions, payroll, HR-related information, all manner of business information on these networks.
And they're zooming.
Right.
Conferences are being hacked.
Right.
So who is that's participating in this, and why are they there?
Right.
So I think because of COVID, the work from home thing has gone up several orders of magnitude, and it will not come back down.
Right. PwC in a recent survey said that about 70% of the survey respondents were working from home, and even if that reduces somewhat once we're kind of past the sort of peak of this COVID era, it's not going back to the 5% that it was several years ago. So yeah, I think we have a lot to be mindful of as we manage our cyber perimeters going forward. Many new challenges ahead. Some old challenges that we've talked about that just won't go away, but much for the cybersecurity professional to think through and mitigate. Thank you, John, so much for joining us for this session of Locking In on Security with Havoc Shield, and stay safe out there.
You're welcome, Phil, and mind your post-it notes.
Will do.
All right.